Hi, welcome to Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people. I'm Michael Knight. I'm one of the pastoral interns here at 9th and O, and we're going to continue our study in Gentle and Lowly in chapter 2. But before we get there, I want you to imagine with me, if you will. You're at a job, and while you're at this job, you're working hard, you're working as well as you know how, but you're being belittled, you're being provoked by your boss or coworkers. And people are looking to get you fired, or maybe they're threatening you in some manner. And when you try to tell your own family, they mock you, or they just tell you to give up and quit. And your friends might even tell you to give up, or maybe they're in danger of losing their jobs as well. And despite all of this, or in the midst of all of this, a family member dies and someone comes and tells you this news, and dealing with all these things. You're hearing the snickering in the break room, and someone says, someone you've known from birth has died. So you want to retreat away, and you want some isolation to grieve this great loss. But what happens instead is you've got customers and you've got coworkers who need your attention, and they come to you in your moment of grief, and they need something from you. They want you to work. And how do we respond to that? Maybe we yell. Maybe we just want to leave and go home, right? Like what? Maybe we just quit, or we just complain to everyone about our circumstances. But what we are going to see is the exact opposite from Jesus. In Matthew 14:14, what we're going to read is John the Baptist has just been killed by Herod. His head's been called for by a platter. It's been delivered by the promise of Herod. And Jesus just gets this news in verse 13. But in verse 14, after he gets this news, it says, "And he went ashore and saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick." And I do want to say, I think it's worth noting that the Bible mentions nothing of the people consoling or having compassion on Jesus. Maybe they knew, maybe they didn't. The disciples seem to have known. But you have no one expressing any type of compassion for Jesus. But you see immediately in verse 14, Jesus having compassion for those healing their sick. And even in the midst of all of this personal things going on, Jesus is going to perform one of the most iconic miracles, feeding of the 5,000, in verses 16 through 21. So what can we see from here? I think we can see that Christ's mercy and compassion gravitates most naturally to him. And we also see this if you think about Romans 5:8. It's another great example. It says, "But God demonstrates his love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." So using the language here of while, or we're still sinners, Christ showed compassion, not in the midst of what we've done, but in spite of it. And so in the midst of this, we have to ask ourselves, how much do we call on that strength of Christ's compassion, to call upon his love and affection in our own lives, realizing that even in the midst of all that he's dealing with, he wants to have compassion. And Dane Ortland's going to say really great on page 30 that when Christ sees the fallenness of the world all about him, his deepest impulse, his most natural instinct is to move towards that sin and suffering and not away from it. And I think we can even realize that in lepers, right? Like we see Jesus heals the most unclean physically people ever known, in the lepers. And Jesus goes and heals them, and he doesn't become unclean, which would have been something that the Jewish people would have taught. The Jewish system was to come across someone who was dead or someone who had leprosy was to take that uncleanliness upon himself. But the most clean person doesn't take our uncleanliness. He makes us clean. He makes us like him. He doesn't become like us. And so in that, he humanizes the dehumanized, and he cleanses the unclean. And so as we see in this is that Jesus has pity and compassion for the defiled and the wretched. If as Ortland also says, if compassion clothed itself and came to earth, it did so in the person of Jesus. And so in closing, Christians have been united with Christ through the Spirit. May we not only feel the compassion of Jesus in our lives, but may we express it daily to others. May we call upon that compassion to be able to utilize that and express that to others. I hope you have a great week and think about the compassion of Jesus as you read chapter 2. Thank you.